Hello there. Welcome to the booth here at Pro Tour Fate Reforged. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. I've got Ian Duke with me here, and it's time for the first quarterfinal match of our top 8. Let's head down to the feature match area right now. Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Fate Reforged. We're in Washington, D.C. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Ian Duke, and we are ready for our first quarterfinal match. We've got a big one to kick things off here. Eric Froehlich. You take a look at Eric there. We call him E-Fro. His friends and fans call him E-Fro, and
that's right.
This is his fourth Pro Tour top 8.
Yeah, amazing. He's been a mainstay on the Pro Tour for quite some time, well-known American player. Really exciting to see him make yet another Pro Tour top 8.
Yeah, looking to make a run here against Jesse Hampton. Now, this is his second Pro Tour top 8. Jesse is a pro out of Seattle. Both of his top 8s came in Modern. He top 8'd the first Modern Pro Tour in Philadelphia, and now this one as well.
So a little bit of a specialist in the format, then we can say.
All right, Ian, so why don't you tell us about what this matchup is going to look like. You can see there's an Inquisition of Kozilek to kick things off for Eric Froehlich. So we're going to get a pretty good look at Jesse Hampton's hand here. It looks like he does have 3 targets for that Inquisition in the form of a Path to Exile, a Thoughtseize, and a Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah, nothing spectacularly threatening here. 2 options really are taking away Hampton's Thoughtseize, depending on what E-Fro has in his hand that he wants to protect, or possibly clearing the way with taking the Path to Exile for E-Fro's first creature or the Scavenging Ooze. I mean, any of those are good targets here, depending on what Eric has in his opening hand. Looks like he does decide to take the Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah, he takes the Ooze, so he wants to take the threat away from Jesse Hampton, who is now left without one.
Yeah, Path to Exile, not a card you're especially afraid of early in the game, just because it is a 2-for-1 disadvantage to cast that on an early creature. So we talked a little bit about how this is almost a straight mirror match. Thoughtseize coming here from Jesse Hampton, with just a couple key differences in the deck.
Well, this choice looks pretty easy for Jesse. He can either take Siege Rhino or put a Lingering Souls in his opponent's graveyard.
Getting half
him.
of a Lingering Souls there, probably not what he's looking to do here.
Interestingly, E-Fro doesn't have much to do on turn 2 anyway, so yeah, definitely going to snag the Rhino here, and that's exactly what happens as Jesse Hampton passes the turn back to Eric.
And we can see this is pretty typical of how these black-green mirror matches play out. They tend to be very grindy attrition matches where the players are 1-for-1 with each other a lot.
How do you like that top deck there?
Yeah, and Eric? I was just going to say, often in these attrition matchups, top decks tend to matter a lot because the players exhaust each other of resources, and sure enough, E-Fro top decks a Tarmogoyf, which is going to let him get on the board early.
Yeah, it's only a 2-3 at the moment, but any fetch land will bump that right up to a nicely respectable 3-4, and the beatdown will commence. So Jesse has to decide if he wants to use his Path to Exile at an early stage on the Tarmogoyf. You mentioned earlier that isn't a super exciting play from Jesse's side. He's going to play a Treetop Village and pass, so he's like, okay, I'll take 2 or 3 from this Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, I mean, the Tarmogoyf only a 2-3 right now with Sorcering Creature in the graveyard, so Hampton can afford to take a couple licks from it. Important card I want to mention here, beyond the Lingering Souls that Froehlich just cast, Treetop Village for Jesse Hampton. In these grindy black-green mirror matches, lands are really important, spell lands and man lands, and we see each player equipped with a number of these.
So Jesse's drawn a Thoughtseize for the turn. But
yeah,
I think he knows the contents of E-Fro's hand at this point.
Yep, he saw it recently. Well, there is one unknown card here, which turns out to be a Path to Exile.
Okay.
But as far as Hampton knows, Froehlich's threats are all either in his graveyard or on the table already. So Thoughtseize is not exactly what he's looking for here, especially with nothing proactive to do himself. So we talk a lot about these mirror matches being grindy, but with Froehlich off to such a powerful start on the battlefield here, it's possible we just see a runaway game. I mean, the cards in Modern are so powerful that getting an early start like this can just kind of snowball.
So Jesse decides to play Stirring Wildwood. It was looking like he might play a Windswept Heath, but decided against it. That would make the Tarmogoyf a little bit bigger. In the meantime, he takes 4 damage. Ooh, and there's that Gavany Township as well. So The Lingering Souls is going to get flashed back, and next turn, another Tarmogoyf for
another
Eric
top deck
Froehlich.
Tarmogoyf, huge. So Froehlich just
Firing on all cylinders.
Yep, gas right off the top. Isn't shy about flashing back that Lingering Souls. He knows Hampton doesn't have any sort of sweeper in his main deck that can take care of those.
That's right.
We've seen throughout the tournament cards like Zealous Persecution able to get a player back from a board state like this, but Hampton not equipped with that in the main deck.
So this is interesting because if Eric draws an untapped land here, he can actually activate his Township and crunch Jesse. He found it. It was a Twilight Mire, and I think this is actually lethal.
This is
2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, it's lethal.
Yeah, just a runaway. Wow.
Yeah. Now
Hampton does have the path to exile.
He has the path, so he doesn't actually get to kill this turn, but you got to figure if Jesse's going to start.
Yeah, with no sweepers in his deck,
paths.
nothing like a Damnation or anything like that to clear the board entirely. There's no way that just drawing one card off the top turn after turn is going to get him out of this situation. So we're going to see no lethal this turn, but next turn almost certainly we'll see Froehlich take the first game. So Gavany Township, a hugely important card in this matchup that everyone should be paying attention to. It's a card that Eric Froehlich has, Jesse Hampton does not have, and this is just a way to turn, seemingly innocuous creatures into powerful threats in the later game. And if these games do play out in this attrition-based style that we've talked about, that can be a powerful way to upgrade your creatures.
So Jesse's activated his Wildwood. He can get a block in and still use his Path to Exile to try to maintain his life total, but those spirits are going to get out of control quickly. He also cracked a fetch land, which makes the Tarmogoyf a 3/4 itself.
Stirring Wildwood, of course, here can activate, block, and then be tapped for white mana to Path to Exile, which is what we'll see.
Right. But it's not even eating the Tarmogoyf here. Those are getting eaten here.
So that's 8 points coming through
2,
from
4,
the spirits.
6, 8 in the air.
That
plus
should
the
knock.
+1/+1 on the
Jesse
Goyf
goes down
it.
to 3 and just goes ahead and scoops it up. He knows what we know, which is that he doesn't have any answers in his deck for a board like that.
Yeah, he took a draw step and then scooped. So that's going to do it for game one. Eric Froehlich with a nice draw.
Yeah. A much faster game
victory
than we expected to see in this matchup, I think.
That's right. All right, we'll be back after just a few messages here.
Ultra Pro is the place to go for all your Magic accessories. With card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and portfolios showing off the best Magic art, Ultra Pro is the standard in safe storage. Visit ultrapro.com for more information. Hunt bigger game by playing in a Grand Prix. These open tournaments feature the best players in your region as well as top Magic pros from around the world. Upcoming Grand Prix include Seville, Memphis, Vancouver, Miami, Liverpool, Cleveland, and Auckland. Visit magic.wizards.com/Grand Prix for the complete schedule.
Back in the feature match area, you'll see we're down to one table there. We're going to be running our quarterfinal matches concurrently here, so it'll be all 4 of those and then our semis, and we'll bring you to the finals. Now, you may be wondering about sideboard strategy here, and Ian, I'm going to actually have you break down some of the things you see, but let's just hear it right from the players themselves. Let's hear from Eric Froehlich and then Jesse Hampton.
Sounds great.
All right, Eric Froehlich, we've got your 15 Game 2, Game 3 cards up here back on the wall. Which of these are going to be coming in after sideboard against your opponent here?
I mean, for sure, the Zealous Persecutions, the Abzan matchup is the main reason we want them. The Lingering Souls fight is huge. We've got Gavany Township's main, which he doesn't have, which is nice. And Zealous Persecution is basically the trump card in the Lingering Souls because it's just so hard to deal with that many flyers. Other than that, Batterskull, which again, it's another very tough to deal with permanent. Maelstrom Pulse pretty much the only way to actually deal with that, and it can be very game changing. As far as the rest of the cards, they're not that good. Fulminator Mage, some people bring in, some people don't. And I know Jesse brought it in against my teammates in the Swiss. He only has 2 copies in his sideboard, so I expect him to bring those in. I'm not sure if I'm going to bring in any copies. If so, I might bring in 1 or so, seeing how the matchup plays out, seeing if his sideboard is different than I expect. Cards like Thoughtseize just aren't that great. And Liliana is pretty bad because, you've got a couple good creatures, but if you're on the draw and they're able to play Lingering Souls before you're able to play Liliana, it just doesn't do anything at that point. The discard is, pretty even. The ultimate's not really realistic. So not an exciting card for me to have in my deck, and Thoughtseize not an exciting card for me to have in my deck. Inquisition being fine, but life does matter. So, those are the cards I'm mostly looking to take out, Thoughtseize and Liliana in some numbers. Zealous Persecution, Batterskull for sure coming in. Fulminator Mage, maybe. We'll see.
All right, we'll see. Eric Froehlich, good luck the rest of the match. All right, Jesse Hampton. Tell me what your plan. We get your sideboard up here behind us. Tell me what your plan is after game 1 in this matchup.
Well, it's a pretty grindy matchup, so I'm gonna want to take out on the draw. I don't think I want any of my Lilianas because Lingering Souls is the most important card, and Liliana is really bad against it. It doesn't kill; it only kills 1 token, and you don't want to make them discard souls. Like that, it's a free card for them. So and you need to have a way to answer souls. So I'm gonna bring in both my Damnations for sure, because it's the only way to recover if they get far ahead. My Sorin, because it makes my souls better, and it's a Planeswalker, another threat and they can't decay it. Fulminators to kill his townships. Definitely bringing those in on the draw. I may or may not bring them in on the play, I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about that. The Batter Skull, just because it's a good value card, I'm assuming he's also going to bring his out of his board. And the Scavengers, because you want cards that can target souls that when they cast it, so either can't cast their souls until turn 5, when they can flash it back immediately, or they have to just throw away half of souls, and that's good. Also, it can get bigger than any of the other creatures because all the other creatures are pretty much 4/5s.
Okay. That's a lot of cards.
And also the Path I'm going to bring.
And the
well.
Path. That's even more cards.
Yeah, lots of cards.
What do you bring out to make room for all that? I mean, you already said the Lilianas.
Lilianas, the Inquisitions of Kozilek's are going to come out because I don't want. You just usually don't want. They're really bad top decks. You don't want discard usually. I think Thoughtseize is okay because it can hit Siege Rhino. It can hit the impact cards, Batter Skull, Tassiger. And I'm going to be boarding. Yeah, so I'll be boarding out my Inquisitions. Probably 1 or 2 Abrupt Decays because, like I said, they don't hit the big impact cards. And some amount of Thoughtseizes based on player draw.
Okay,
So
Jesse
a lot of
Hampton,
discard.
thanks a lot. Good luck the rest of the match.
Thank you.
And welcome back to the feature match area. Ian, let's talk about the land situation here. These players both are playing to Treetop Village, but they've differed in their choices from there.
Yeah, so the 2 most important ones are Gavany Township for Eric Froehlich. This is just fantastic with his Noble Hierarchs and his Lingering Souls into the later game here. Makes each of those a potent threat by itself. On the other side, Jesse Hampton has 1 copy of Vault of the Archangel, which can give his creatures lifelink and death touch, allow things like spirit tokens to trade up for Siege Rhinos potentially. So those are the 2 key lands on each side. In addition to that, Jesse Hampton has Stirring Wildwoods, 2 copies, and these are just sort of extra treetop villages, extra man lands in case the game goes long and grindy.
Okay, looks like we are underway here in game 2.
So those sideboard interviews were interesting. We saw players have a slightly different take on hand disruption here. Eric Froehlich really not interested in Thoughtseizes post board, but Jesse Hampton choosing to keep in his Thoughtseizes, but not his Inquisitions.
All right, he sees a decent hand from Eric. Eric's got Path to Exile, Lingering Souls, and a Siege Rhino in his hand. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's not a super fast hand. I don't think, barring top decks, we're not going to see Ifro take away the game on tempo like he did so quickly last game. But, he's got all the lands he needs. He's got a path just in case things go wrong. And Lingering Souls and Siege Rhino, 2 of the powerful cards going into the mid-game there. So he's not worried about losing the game early, and he's got some power in the mid-game. He's got all the lands he needs. It's certainly a keeper, but, again, not a hand that's necessarily going to run away with the game like his last one did.
All right, and once again, Jesse's going to opt to take the most powerful card in the pile, which is the Siege Rhino.
So both players identified Lingering Souls as one of, if not the most important card in the matchup. It's super effective against cards like Liliana. Both players said they're not interested in keeping Liliana in post-board. And of note, Ifro has Zealous Persecution on his sideboard, which is just the master card in the Lingering Souls mirror match.
Yeah, it seems like Ifro has the Lingering Souls mirror match pretty well locked up with the Gavany Townships as well.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a huge advantage for him post-board.
It's interesting that Jesse decided to play the Vault of the Archangel over the Township.
Yeah, that's somewhat of an interesting choice. I think part of that has to do with Ifro also having Noble Hierarch in his deck. Just, Gavany Township we've seen classically used really effectively with these mana elf style creatures.
Yeah, I've seen some very big Birds of Paradise over the course of the weekend. Not from these decks, but they're around. You may very well see them a little later today in the top 8 in the hands of some of our other competitors too.
So both players just kind of developing the early game a little bit. Again, Ifro with a Tarmogoyf off the top after the Thoughtseize, so a good start for him on turn 2.
He's smiling. You can't tell, but he's smiling.
He's like, wow, this is the 3rd Tarmogoyf I've top decked just at the perfect moment when I have 2 extra lands to use. So that's a 3/4 Tarmogoyf right now.
Already,
yep,
yeah.
Land, sorcery, creature in the graveyard. Just going to put a little bit of pressure on Jesse Hampton, ensure that he has to do something reactive to deal with that. I think we see 2 Siege Rhinos and a Path to Exile among Jesse's business spells right now. I'll bring that up for you. And a Tassiger as well. So several 4/5 creatures all stand to outmatch the Tarmogoyf as things are currently. Of course, the Tarmogoyf could grow with Path to Exile being instant.
Looks like Jesse just had a broken sleeve there. Gonna get that fixed up, and we'll be right back underway here. So Eric with a quick win, hoping to make it into the semifinals in short order here, but Jesse Hampton's going to do everything he can to stop him from doing that. And not a lot this turn, though. He's going to play a Stirring Wildwood tapped and just pass the turn back.
So we've got a little bit of information about how so the players have sideboarded here. Eric Froehlich taking a relatively conservative route here, just for now bringing in the 2 Zealous Persecutions we mentioned and a 2nd copy of Batterskull to add to the 1 in his main deck. So that indicates, I think...
So he has left in the Lilianas?
No, the 3 cards he brought out were his 3 Lilianas, as he mentioned in the interview. Yeah,
but the Thoughtseize has stayed in.
The Thoughtseize did stay in, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because he said there he wasn't a big fan of him.
Yeah, it's not a card he's a fan of, but he doesn't have anything else that stands out that he wants to bring in. He mentioned Fulminator Mage as a possibility, but not a slam dunk.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too in the discussions. He said that he wasn't planning on bringing in Fulminator Mage, but Jesse said that there are situations where he would for the townships.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the key difference here is Eric Froehlich has the townships, Jesse Hampton does not, and that makes Fulminator Mage more valuable for Jesse Hampton. So here comes the Lingering Souls, key card in the matchup, just adding to Ifro's board.
Passes the turn back to Jesse Hampton, who's got a Siege Rhino. Now,
15, 17.
let's see if it survives, because that is going to dominate this board state for the time being. But considering that that's Jesse's first creature play of the game, it's not unlikely that it gets just killed somehow by Eric.
Yeah, and we see Ifro does have a Path to Exile. I imagine he'll fire that off here, making his Tarmogoyf a 4/5. 6 more points of damage. Yeah, knocks Jesse down to 11 and puts Jesse in a spot where, he's not facing immediate doom, but he's on the back foot.
Which is where he's been for the duration of this match, I'll mention. And he said he's going to get a forest, and like you said, Ian, here comes 6 damage. So Jesse Hampton finds himself behind quickly.
Yeah, now, speaking more about sideboards, Jesse Hampton brought in his 1 copy of Sorin, as he mentioned, Path to Exile, Batterskull, Scavenging Ooze, just to supplement what he has in the main deck, but also 2 copies of Damnation. And that's a card he didn't have access to in the first game, made it impossible for him to come back from such a losing situation, but now it is in his deck. Not in his hand just yet, but it's certainly something he could draw into that could get him out of this jam.
All right, so we'll see what Jesse comes up with here. He's got an extra mana thanks to the Path to Exile, so he has some wiggle room here. He does have a Stirring Wildwood as well.
And a couple of removal spells in his hand, as we do see.
What does he have? He's got a Path and a Dismember.
Yep,
nice. So that'll get the job done pretty well for Jesse. It
both
looks
those
like
cards
he's
great
not
at
too
taking
far
out a
off here.
Tarmogoyf, not as effective at taking out a swarm of Lingering Souls tokens.
Yeah, he does have his Stirring Wildwood, though, which has reach. It can jump up and gobble up a token here and there.
So I think what we're going to try to see him do is use one of his 2 removal spells, probably Dismember on the Tarmogoyf, get down his 2nd Siege Rhino, buys him a little bit of time against the Lingering Souls tokens, and then if they can get into this game where they're both low on resources and Jesse has the Stirring Wildwood threatening to block the Spirit tokens, and a Siege Rhino threatening to trample over any blocking Spirit tokens, we could definitely see him stabilize and start to get aggressive here. But we'll see how the game plays out over the next 2 turns, I think are going to be really key.
Let's list it in here.
If you find it, tell me. Yeah.
I see.
Okay.
So they were just, I think, double-checking that sleeve wasn't identifiable.
Yeah, just one of those nuts and bolts things that
Yeah.
can come up during a Magic tournament.
Right.
Good for players to be, on the same page about that.
That's right. Ooh, a Maelstrom Pulse right
Wow,
off the
that's a
top for
huge
Jesse.
pickup for Jesse Hampton. That can clear away
Jeez,
all
he
4 of
can
those
now-
spirit tokens.
He can now kill both the Tarmogoyf and all of the spirit tokens this turn.
So, looking at the deck list, I thought that Maelstrom Pulse might be not one of the best cards in the mirror match simply because your cards share names with your opponent's cards in so many cases. But that single copy of Maelstrom Pulse is going to be the perfect thing to get him out of this jam and clear away those spirit tokens.
Yeah, Damnation would have been fine. Pulse
Also
okay.
fine, yeah. So between the Pulse and either the Dismember or the Path to Exile he has in his hand right now, he's capable of clearing away that board. Decides first to play the Siege Rhino, which I like here, just getting a presence on the board. He'll still be able to path that Tarmogoyf if he needs to, but I think, in fact, the Siege Rhino can just go ahead and block the Tarmogoyf. They're both 4/5s right now. Instant land, creature, and sorcery in the graveyard.
So Jesse will give up a little bit of life here, most of which he gained back from the Siege Rhino anyway. Taking some damage in the air from the spirits, but...
And this just gives him one more turn to kind of set up his board first. He's not really worried about the small amount of extra damage he's going to take, and it'll allow him to give Ifro one more turn to potentially play into the removal spells that Jesse Hampton has in his hand. Just give him a little bit of more information before he acts and decides how to spend his Dismember and Path to Exile.
All right, so Eric's going to attack with everything. It's a 4/5 Tarmogoyf. Jesse was confirming that as he passed the turn back.
But Gavany Township from Ifro main phase changes the shape of this combat quite a bit, doesn't it, Marshall?
It does. So what's going to happen here is Jesse's going to take a lot more damage than he thought, but he's also going to have Ifro, we call it time walk himself. He's going to use up all of his mana for the turn. Jesse's going to get to Path to Exile the Tarmogoyf, which he's kind of forced Ifro to do with that block, or at least encouraged him. And then he gets to untap and Maelstrom Pulse away all the tokens, leaving Eric Froehlich with nothing. Now, Jesse did take a big hit. He took 8 there.
Yeah.
So that could matter down the line. As Ifro said in his little sideboard segment, he said the life does matter in this matchup.
It
that
does
was another
matter,
reason
yeah.
he was talking about the Thoughtseize. So
Yeah, oftentimes in these grindy mid-range matchups, it's easy to think of life total as a completely disposable resource you can leverage to get card advantage. But between spirit tokens from Lingering Souls chipping away and the presence of 4 Siege Rhinos in each deck, I mean, you never know. The game could go long and Ifro could top deck 2 more Siege Rhinos, which would be the 6 points that Jesse Hampton has left.
that's right. All right, so Jesse fires off Maelstrom Pulse. That's going to clear away the board of Eric Froehlich.
Wastes no time getting with the Siege Rhino. He knows he needs to close out the game relatively quickly.
Yeah, so he crunches in there for 4. And what's his follow-up play here? Remember, he's got that Dismember in hand for any single threat. Is it Tasigur?
Yeah, I believe it's going to be Tasigur here. I think there's no reason not to commit more to the board, try to end the game quickly. Both players are low on resources.
So this is where Eric doesn't have Damnation or that type of spell. He has to 1-for-1 for each of these creatures.
But importantly, a Siege Rhino off the top for Ifro.
Wow.
Big top deck there. I mean, that's half of Jesse's life total, as well as extending Ifro's own. And it can threaten to block either of the 4 or 5 creatures.
I mean, this is going to keep him not dead this turn, right? Like, he's at 7?
Yeah, so let's take a look here. Jesse Hampton does have 2 man lands. He can activate one of them with the mana he has right now. If he has another land, he can activate both of them.
And can he still play... He's down to 3, remember.
So yeah,
he
but
can
so
only pay 2 for Exceed
Ifro
mana.
at 10 life right now. So the Siege Rhino can block one of the 4 power creatures. If Jesse Hampton has another untapped land, he can activate both Stirring Wildwood and Treetop Village, attack with everything. That's 14 points of damage. Ifro can only block one of the creatures. He would take 10 there.
All right, so he's going to go for the Dismember pre-combat because he knows that Eric's going to block Tasigur.
Yep.
And this is 4/8/11. And
Ifro
that's
with
going to do
no
it.
answer to any of those creatures.
Yeah, no answer in hand. And Jesse Hampton's able to piece together a victory to set up a game 3 here in our first quarterfinal match. That's the kind of thing that I expect from this matchup, right? This sort of back and forth, and then occasionally one of the players will have one of their sort of trump cards, one of their over-the-top type cards.
Yeah, definitely. It's a matchup where just being +1 card over your opponent can really make the difference because each of these threatening cards hits so hard that if you're just short that last removal spell, or if you have an extra removal spell to cover your opponent's last creature, that can be all the difference in the game.
That was a close one.
Yeah, definitely.
Certainly felt like Eric was ahead for most of the game, but that Maelstrom Pulse that Jesse drew really swung it.
That was the key moment in that game, was the top deck of the Maelstrom Pulse.
So players are going to go back and consult their sideboards here. We did talk about, or we heard Jesse in his sideboard segment talk about the difference between being on the play and on the draw. What are you seeing here for boards? Is there anything major as far as that goes?
Yeah, I mean, Jesse talked about bringing in his Fulminators on the draw rather than on the play. Now, you might think of Fulminator Mage being a land destruction spell as something that might be more effective on the play, where you can set your opponent behind on lands and then capitalize with tempo. But that's not exactly how these games play out. Again, it's more about one-for-oneing with resources. And I think what Jesse's probably thinking is, if he's on the draw, the game's a little bit more likely to kind of drag out a little bit. Both players are going to see more cards. He's going to want to have an answer to the township going to the late game. Ifro, on the other hand, relatively well set up for the late game. He's got the 2 Batter Skulls. He's got the Zealous Persecutions.
Yeah, Ifro has 1 main Batter Skull and 1 on the board.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's one of the most powerful cards in these mid-range matchups.
So one of the cards that's really made a huge impact here this weekend on Modern is Siege Rhino.
Siege Rhino, yeah.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. And, as somebody who works in R&D, it's my understanding that you guys are aware of the older formats like Legacy and Modern, but don't necessarily put a lot of resources into balancing newer cards for it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's more or less correct. I mean, these older formats like Modern, like Legacy, like Vintage, they just have a tremendous number of cards in them, and so few of the new cards we make impact these formats in a huge way, just by statistics, by nature of large numbers, that it would be incredibly difficult to test that effectively. So instead what we do is we just think about what's the shape of the metagame of these formats. Of course, we follow them, follow tournaments, play a lot ourselves, and think about, what are we introducing, how could that impact things, and kind of plan things out that way. Now, Siege Rhino, a card we've seen make a lot of impact in Standard, but often cards that are powerful enough for Standard, or even among the most powerful cards in Standard, still aren't powerful enough to crack these older formats like Modern, like Legacy, and so on. Siege Rhino is an exception to that rule because it's a multicolor card. And the reason for that is in Standard, you have to pay a big price to assemble a mana base that can cast cards like Siege Rhino on time. And so in exchange for that, we give you a little bit more power. We give you, a bigger creature than normal, enter the battlefield effect, and so on. In Modern, the mana bases are just so fluid, so efficient. You have the fetch shock mana bases. You have a variety of dual lands to choose from. That Siege Rhino transitions very well into Modern just because it's so natural and easy to cast on turn 4.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of Siege Rhinos in decks here in Modern, and looks like he's here to stay.
Yeah, it's certainly proven itself a very powerful card.
I've heard people compare it to Bloodbraid Elf, in the sense that it costs 4 mana, you get a free spell. Now, it's always the same spell with Siege Rhino, where with Bloodbraid, you could get many different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of them good.
They're a little bit in different nature depending on the metagame. I'd rather have Bloodbraid Elf against a more controlling metagame with counter spells and a lot of one-for-one removal.
Right.
Siege Rhino particularly powerful against the burn-based decks and aggressive decks that we've seen a lot of this weekend.
That's right. All right, so players are taking a look at their opening hands here as we hit Game 3 between Eric Froehlich and Jesse Hampton. And they've both kept. So we are underway in the decider here. So this is an Overgrown Tomb for Eric Froehlich. He's just going to play a tapped, not much on the first turn, but a tapped Swamp means that Jesse's playing Thoughtseize here on turn 1. And we're going to get a look at Eric's hand. He's got Tassiger, the Golden Fang, a Dismember, an Abrupt Decay, and a Scavenging Ooze, along with a pair of lands. So it looks like a pretty solid opener there for Eric.
Yeah, pretty solid. A little bit on the reactive side. Tassiger, a great play probably for turn 3 or turn 4 for Ifro, but he doesn't really have any any early aggression like we've seen him, well, top deck into in the past couple of games.
That's
But
right.
you never know, that Tarmogoyf could be lurking to come out on turn 2 again.
I mean, I'm assuming that there's one on top of his deck.
Yeah, you
He's
got to
probably
assume. I mean,
assuming
just
that
based
too.
on prior history here, right?
I can recognize patterns. I think Jesse's hoping that that pattern does not persist here.
But in all seriousness, whether or not Ifro gets on the board early, this is just a fine opening hand. Got plenty of answers to whatever Jesse can present.
So let's see what Jesse took. He took Tassiger. So he's consistently taken the most powerful long game card when we've seen it. He's taken Siege Rhino, Tassiger here. So.
And note that a lot of these cards 1-for-1 with each other, but Jesse is always wow. Can you believe it, Marshall?
It's a
We're joking
Tarmogoyf.
about it, and then it just happens.
Wow.
Yeah, so he gets on the board early here. But just a quick point, although many of these cards 1-for-1 with each other, we've seen Jesse Hampton consistently err on the side of taking away the threatening card rather than the reactive card. And of course, when you're 1-for-1ing a lot with your opponent, if you end up +1 answer, that doesn't really do you any good. You can't use an answer to defeat your opponent. But if you end up +1 threat, you get on the board, you can start attacking. And so we'll see players try to eliminate each other's threats before they eliminate each other's answers in most cases.
So Tarmogoyf hits the battlefield for Ifro on turn 2 through Thoughtseize on all 3 games here. Is this one strong enough? I think it's going to get Abrupt Decayed by Jesse.
Yep.
I think Jesse drew his own Tarmogoyf. Let's take a look at his hand. Yeah, he did. So he could have played that, but instead he's decided that he wants to deal with the threat or not. He's actually waiting.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is 3 damage that he would be giving up here.
Yeah, I mean, we may see him just wait until the end of the turn just to have more information before he decides whether or not to kill the Tarmogoyf.
I mean, he might want to do it. Now, he knows that Scavenging Ooze is coming down. It could just be a decision point between, well, I'm more worried about Scavenging Ooze than I am Tarmogoyf here.
Yep. And I think that's, I'm sure, what he's considering here.
All right, so he took that damage.
And major reason for this is Hampton has his own Scavenging Ooze. So he wants to eliminate Ifros if he can, get his own Scavenging Ooze, because of course they compete for the same resources, trying to eat creatures in both players' graveyards.
Right, also the Scavenging Ooze will mitigate the Tarmogoyf in a pretty big way.
Yeah,
if it gets to stick.
But yeah, both players have Tarmogoyfs, but if Jesse Hampton can use his Abrupt Decay on Ifro's Scavenging Ooze, play his own Scavenging Ooze, he can sort of eliminate Ifro's Tarmogoyf from the equation and not have to worry about whether or not he commits his own.
Now, Eric has his own copy of Abrupt Decay in hand. He's also got a Dismember. Jesse is aware of some of these. All right, so we missed a little action there, but it looks like the Tarmogoyf ultimately did get killed by Abrupt Decay, and there's a Tarmogoyf to follow up now for Hampton, so he's decided to just go a little bit bigger, but this will potentially lock up some of Eric's mana if he does want to try to attack on the Shrink Your Tarmogoyf axis here. He might have bigger fish to fry, though. He's got a Batter Skull in his hand.
Ifro with Abrupt Decay of his own. So if he chooses to, he can take out that Tarmogoyf, although with the Scavenging Ooze on the table, he's not under immediate pressure to do that. He can just control the creatures in the graveyard, control the cards in the graveyard, threaten to shrink the Tarmogoyf.
So no blocks from Jesse, and that's going to prompt Abrupt Decay, which is going to get Scavenging Ooze. Well, he's going to eat the Tarmogoyf that he just killed. So Scavenging Ooze is going to be a 3/3, and he killed Goyf as well. So Eric continuing his beatdown ways. Hits for 3.
So both players appear to have Batter Skull in their hand, which is going to be the next phase of this game, I think. With neither player taking a commanding lead in the early game, of course, Ifro a little bit ahead with his Scavenging Ooze, we could transition into more of a mid-game with Batter Skulls battling.
It's kind of interesting. The Scavenging Ooze is going to get quite large. It's already a 4/4.
Yeah.
There is a Tarmogoyf sitting in Eric's graveyard as well that can make it a 5/5, which can kind of ignore the Batter Skull, or at least mitigate it. All right, here's the Scavenging Ooze for Jesse, who immediately uses it on the opposing Tarmogoyf while Eric is tapped out. So Eric currently winning this particular fight. Scavenging Ooze at 4-4. And it's going to rumble.
So Batterskull, a recent pickup for Eric Froehlich, which means that Hampton hasn't seen it yet from his initial Thoughtseize. And so Hampton's probably thinking, I've got a Batterskull. That's going to be my sort of long game plan, is getting that into play. He doesn't know that Ifro can match him punch for punch with his own.
All right, so Eric decided to fire off Dismember on the opposing Scavenging Ooze after his wasn't blocked. He ate the Ooze, and now it's a 5-5.
Wow.
So that Scavenging Ooze is one away from being out of Dismember range, and it's already bigger than a Batterskull.
But it looks like Hampton did just pick up a Dismember. Is that right?
Yes.
Opts instead to go for his Batterskull here, which is a little bit risky. I mean, there are no more creatures in the graveyard right now, so the Scavenging Ooze doesn't stand to go up to a 6/6 just yet. But, you know, you always have to be a little thoughtful about missing the opportunity to dismember that.
That's right. All right, there's Batterskull now for Eric Froehlich. So Batterskull's on either side like you described a few minutes ago, Ian. But it does look like the opening has presented itself for Hampton to take care of Scavenging Ooze while Froehlich is tapped out here. How does the Batterskull scenario play out, though, when both players have them and one is vastly ahead on damage?
Well, great question. We do see that Eric Froehlich just picked up a Noble Hierarch in his hand. And this is sort of a small mirror breaker card in a sense, in that it lets Ifro have larger creatures on the attack than Jesse Hampton can block with, all else being equal.
All right, so Jesse feels like he's behind, and I think he's got his Dismember lined up. If Eric goes to equip Batterskull, he can make him use his whole mana for the turn here. Eric can try to go for the win if he does that. You know, he can make 9 power, and that would kill Jesse. If he doesn't, he can still hit Jesse for 5 freely here.
Yeah, well, do note that Jesse has a Stirring Wildwood there back in his land row. So he's got an option to jump block if it comes to it.
True.
So I think we're going to see Ifro maybe take a little bit more of a conservative route here.
You are correct. He is going to play a Noble Hierarch. He's not going to go for the equip here.
Okay.
And Jesse says, sure. And Eric says, combat.
So Jesse really thinking about how and when he wants to deploy this
Yes.
Dismember here.
This is the last chance that he has if he just wants to fire it off straight up on the Scavenging Ooze.
So I like this. He's making Ifro commit the Ooze to combat, putting the Exalted trigger on the stack, trying to dismember in response. If somehow something goes wrong, well, I guess he no longer has enough mana to activate the Stirring Wildwood as well. Okay, so I was going to say one option would be to activate the Stirring Wildwood and block first and then try to dismember, but that would require letting the Exalted trigger resolve first, so the Ooze would still survive at a 1/1.
That's right.
And he'd risk losing the Stirring Wildwood and not killing the Ooze. So.
Right. So instead, he just fires off his Dismember here. It's currently on the stack. And I think Jesse's trying to figure out, well, how is he going to... I don't think there's very many... Well, you can't really get a creature in the yard at instant speed unless he wants to kill his own Noble Hierarch. Seems unlikely.
No, he just takes the opportunity to remove...
Yeah.
I didn't see quite which card, but just remove an additional card from Jesse's graveyard.
Okay.
Of course, any cards left in Jesse's graveyard can later be taken advantage of by Tasigur.
Of course. So Eric plays a land.
So we're in a situation where both players essentially out of cards in hand. Hampton has just one more land in his hand than Urborg. Both players have Batterskulls. Ifro at a slight advantage with the Noble Hierarch here, allowing him to attack. And each player having a man-land Treetop Village facing off against Stirring Wildwood. So a relatively close game, certainly a low-resource game. This is one of those games we were talking about earlier in the match, how just kind of both players trade, exhaust each other of resources, and then we get into this later game that's sort of influenced by top decks, but in this case, it's also a Batterskull war.
Right, so, and that's what Jesse has to do. He actually has to take 3 damage from his lands here just to be able to return Batterskull on end step.
Yep.
Pretty rough for Hampton. He was at a relatively cushy 8. You know, potentially could take 2 hits. Now he's at 5 and getting a little bit riskier, but he's got to do what he's got to do to get that batter skull back down first. Eric is going to make the same play.
Life total really, really mattering here with Jesse on the back foot. It makes it hard for him to navigate combat.
Yeah, let's not forget the, siege rhinos can come out of nowhere, so if Jesse does get low.
Yeah, or even just an aggressive attack from Ifro, between a batter skull plus a germ token and activating a man land. If Jesse taps out and doesn't leave up his own Stirring Wildwood, Ifro can force through even more damage that way. So
Eric significantly ahead in damage race. As far as the board state goes, they're almost at parity, though. That little Noble Hierarch, kind of breaks that mirror up when it comes to the batter skull
just a
fights.
huge thing here.
It's so impactful, even at this late stage. And they talked about it in deck choice and running the Noble Hierarch, and it gets your Tarmogoyfs bigger than theirs. In this case, it'll get his batter skull bigger. Siege Rhinos, Tassigers all fight through each other if you're the one with the Noble Hierarch. And there it is. Noble Hierarch's going to get equipped, and an Exalted Trigger is going to go. Jesse has no choice but to chump block here. He's going to go back up to 9. He has not enough mana here to return his batter skull.
Yeah, and could be an important window, something like a Maelstrom Pulse off the top to answer the batter skull. I mean,
yeah, that would work. He could return his batter skull.
He could return his own, yeah.
Yeah, kill the other one. Jesse's now at 9. He's found a Lingering Souls.
Okay.
That should buy him a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially since he can actually equip one of the spirit tokens with the batter skull.
Hey, that's the plan right now. He does that immediately. Now he's got a 5/5 flying lifelink with Vigilance, and he also found an Urborg there, which let that Verdant Catacombs tap for mana, so he didn't have to crack it.
Yeah,
I
think he had the Urborg in his hand for a little while, but
yeah.
it being an untapped land doesn't do any damage. Important there. So the Noble Hierarch can attack as a 5/6 with the Exalted Trigger here, but Jesse Hampton has a 5/5 Spirit Token with the Batter Skull and additional Spirit Token, so he can threaten to double block. He's taking a small risk that Ifro top decked a removal spell, but I think that in his position, he just has to do that at this point. He's low enough on life.
Yeah, he also does have the 2 backup Spirit Tokens in tow.
It's not like Ifro can present much of a bluff here either. He top decked your removal spell and he can safely attack in, or...
This kind of board state was really frustrating. It took like 2 hours for us to finish, and we just gave up.
Jesse talking about the board state.
Yeah, about how grindy it can be. I think he said they played some games where it can take 2 hours to finish a game like this. I'm sure he's exaggerating a little bit, but again, these games can grind out.
Yeah, I think Ifro's hoping this takes a little shorter time than that.
You have 2 cards, right? Yeah.
Take a look at Ifro's hand. Top decked his own Lingering Souls.
Maybe that's why Ifro laughed. He's like, yeah, this is going to go for a long time.
So just thinking about the way this game might play out, if Ifro can cast his own Lingering Souls, equip a Spirit Token with a Batter Skull, the Noble Hierarch lets him sort of profitably attack each turn, because his Spirit Token with the Batter Skull would trade for 2 of Jesse's each turn. But it'd be a couple turns in the making for the game to play out that way, and things could definitely change depending on what players draw.
So cast and flashback Lingering Souls. No townships on board, right?
No townships. That would be a huge draw for Ifro if we saw a township come out.
So that's something that that Jesse's not going to have to worry about currently. And yeah, we might want to get comfortable here. This could take a while. It's pretty tough to work through all of these tokens with the double Batter Skulls going.
Yeah, a lot to think about here. Also, don't forget that Jesse Hampton has Stirring Wildwood, which does have reach, so it can get into combat with these Spirit Tokens too.
He's going to attack with both Spirit Tokens here, the one wearing the Batter Skull and the Knot.
Yeah, I love taking the opportunity to attack here. I mean, he's offering a trade 1-for-1 with Ifro's Spirit Tokens, but more importantly, with Vigilance on the Batter Skull, he's just gaining some life essentially for free.
I mean, he also hit Ifro for 6. That's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, Ifro's at a healthy 21 right now. I think Jesse's more concerned with bolstering his own life total than necessarily finishing off Ifro in a timely fashion.
So he flashes back his Lingering Souls. He's also got Stirring Wildwood activation kind of hiding back there. So now Ifro's going to play the same game in the other direction. But again, that Noble Hierarch means that Jesse's going to start losing. Oh, this is before attacks. Wow.
Okay, so Ifro
So
trying to
abrupt
play
decay.
things out the way I described, trying to get the Exalted bonus on his Spirit token, which would essentially make each of his own Spirit tokens trade for 2 of Jesse's. However, Abrupt Decay throws a wrench in that plan, taking out Noble Hierarch, and now each Spirit token is essentially worth the same amount as one another.
Interestingly, Ifro offers the trade, and Jesse takes it.
Yeah.
Usually you don't see that.
Yeah, I think it's totally reasonable to do here, depending on what Ifro's sort of longer-term game plan is. You do have to give some consideration to the fact that Ifro has Zealous Persecution and Gavany Township in his hands, so you might argue that he wants to keep the board state a little bit more cluttered and complicated, just in case he draws into one of those spells, but there's also something to be said for just kind of trading things off, simplifying the board state, and you know, being a little bit ahead on life total, just hoping to top deck a little bit better from here.
So now that Jesse has bolstered his life total up, he's going to thin out his deck a little bit there with the Verdant Catacombs.
Yeah, Hampton in a much more comfortable position than he was a couple
He's
turns
at
ago, wouldn't you say?
18 all of a sudden.
But more so than that, he's actually got a pretty stable board here.
Yes. Yes, he has completely stabilized, really. And he's the one that gets to start equipping his Batter Skulls first.
Now, one thing to note here, Ifro has a Treetop Village, and I believe he has enough mana to activate that and equip Batter Skull to it. So temporarily on his turn, he'll be able to attack with an 7/7 Trampler.
22.
Jesse, in the meantime, getting through with some spirits, gaining some more life.
Oh.
And Vault of the Archangel.
Wow.
Huge, huge for Jesse Hampton here. This is going to let his spirit tokens trade up with anything, really, because they have Death Touch now. So if we can take a look at Vault of the Archangel there for the viewers at home. This is the white-black land, sort of the same cycle of Gavany Township. And it can give all your creatures Death Touch and lifelink until end of turn. So this lets spirits trade up for real creatures like Tarmogoyf and Siege Rhino. Lets Jesse Hampton gain a bunch of life. And
The
it's
old
going
Dark
to...
Ascension 1-2 punch there.
Yeah.
19.
So I was talking about how Ifro would be looking at setting up Treetop Village plus Batter Skull as a big attacker, but as of next turn, Jesse will be able to use Vault of the Archangel to stop that from happening.
All right, so Batter Skull's going to get equipped up. And we've seen this sequence time and time again. And once again, Jesse obliges and blocks. So
And
Ifro
now-
seems content to just chip away at
Yeah,
the...
now I definitely agree with just trading off and simplifying the board state, because the presence of that Vault of the Archangel is going to make each of those spirit tokens able to trade off with basically
with
anything. Ifro can
Tarmogoyfs,
present.
with Treetop Villages, with Siege Rhinos. I don't think that Ifro would risk a Tasker at this point, but that kind of card is now up for grabs. Jesse's now pulled ahead in the damage race. Again, he's got a tempo advantage on Eric, as he's the one that keeps getting to equip and attack with his Batter Skull here. And he's going to do that right now. Jesse has drawn a Path to Exile for the turn, which looks fantastic here, right? I mean, an extra land for Eric is not going to make a big difference, and it's going to just outright kill anything.
Yeah, it essentially means he has Ifro's next big threat covered.
And in comes a spirit and another spirit once again. Life totals lofty, and Eric's going to do the same thing as Jesse and just crack that fetch land. Try to find some action off the top of his deck. He's going to need multiple actions here. I mean, a card like does Eric have Tassiger?
He does. He has 2 copies of Tassiger, and normally that would be a great card for him to draw in this situation. However, we know Jesse already has that covered with a Path to Exile.
Though it looks like Eric could get an activation or maybe even 2 in before the Path took down Tassiger.
Yeah.
So that still would be an interesting draw. I don't think he drew it, though. So here's Batterskull getting equipped, and again, Jesse obliges. So somehow both players are happy trading off spirit tokens.
Yeah.
Here. It's got to be better for one than the other, right?
Well, I mean, the thing with Vigilance on the Batterskull, if one player says, I'm happy trading, the other says, I'm not, the player who doesn't want to trade then also can't attack by that logic, right? So they're just like, no matter what we do, these are both going to keep getting in combat. So
they're just stuck in this spiral.
Nobody wants to be the one to just let it through and not get,
of course,
take the 4 extra damage.
That puts you to 17. Made it 43.
Of course, the more spirits that Jesse Hampton trades off, the less powerful his Vault of the Archangel gets. And, eventually we might see man lands starting to get equipped with Batterskull, for example. Take a look at Ifro's hand.
A Liliana of the Veil.
of the Veil, okay.
Well, could think of worse than that.
Yeah, it looks like for this particular game,
he's going to play Thoughtseize here, though, to kick it off, Ian, and that might just prompt that Path to Exile to take down that Spirit token. What's the other card in hand for Jesse?
Looks like just a... Oh, no, it is a Thoughtseize as well, I believe.
Right, so he's going to Path to Exile the token, and he's going to lose his Thoughtseize, but that isn't a big loss for him. Eric's going to lose a couple of life, and after the dust is settled, Hampton's ahead. He's the one with the Spirit token. They both have... One of them has a Stirring Wildwood. That's Jesse. On the other side, it's a Treetop Village. But those are relatively even considering the Batterskull. And Jesse's the one with the equipped up token.
Yep. And don't forget, even if players run out of creatures here, Batterskull can always return to hand and come right back down with a Germ token.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there it is. We talked about it for a little while there, Ian, and the Treetop Village finally picked up the Batterskull and crunched for 7, but I don't think that Jesse could have written down the life total quicker. He's just like, no problem.
I mean, making some headway, but
36 he falls.
Realistically, something major is going to have to happen to kind of break this stall that these players have here.
So Jesse's at 36. He was at 4 at one point, 3. And he has chipped his way all the way back up. He's going to get that life back, almost all of it immediately. And is it time to start chipping away with the Wildwood as well?
Yeah, I mean, I see no reason not to this turn.
And he has the option of leaving it back and then doing a double block.
Yeah, that's super risky at this point.
Oh, there's Tassiger the Golden Fang for Jesse Hampton.
Huge.
Wow. So what you see here is he's going to use Delve to cull away the cards that he doesn't want.
Right. Notice that
back.
He's actually leaving some lands in his graveyard and removing non-lands to limit Eric's options as far as using Tassiger's ability.
This could be huge. If Eric can't come up with a way to deal with Tassiger in the next turn or two, Jesse could completely take over this game.
And he leaves just 2 lands and a Path to Exile in his graveyard.
He knows what he wants.
Yep.
17 to 41.
If he just has path after path after path, how can Eric ever get back in this? Wow, what a big draw for Hampton. Ifro takes a deep breath. Draws his card. He's already got Liliana of the Veil in his hand.
Yeah, unfortunately, Liliana doesn't hit what he wants it to hit here.
Absolutely not. He is going to play it and minus it to at least get the Spirit token off the battlefield here. It looks like Jesse might want to sack his Stirring Wildwood. Is that what? Or he's just activating in response. Sure. Jesse's deep in the tank. Ifro.
So I mill 2 and then you give me 1.
Mills 2 lands, forces Path to Exile to be Eric Froehlich's choice to return to Jesse Hampton's hand.
And token down. He is thinking about it. But yes, the token's going to go away ultimately. And there's a Noble Hierarch that's going to get cast and equipped in one fell swoop there from Eric Froehlich.
Still no answer to Tassiger.
No, and he's getting activated again, Ian. So this is where Tassiger can completely take over. What did Jesse hit?
Scavenging Ooze and Lingering Souls.
So pick your poison, Eric Froehlich. Neither of them look particularly good from Efro's perspective. He let him have Lingering Souls, but that's just infinite food. And is Jesse Hampton moving into the closing stages here?
Yeah, I mean, the vice is certainly tightening here.
What does the path look like to get out of this for Eric?
Step 1 is answering Tasigur, that's for sure. So we're going to want to see a removal spell come off the top for Eric Froehlich sometime soon.
Oh, this is bad news for Eric Froehlich, though, because Jesse right now has 2 activations of Tasigur just sitting there. He's going to use Path, and Eric Froehlich just tosses the Noble Hierarch to the side. He sees the writing on the wall. There's still some game to be played, but he knows how far behind he is here.
Yeah, each Tasigur activation worth more than a card draw here, since it does always bring back a non-land card.
Right.
So just tons of value coming here.
And it's a Tarmogoyf to add, and he's going to play the Lingering Souls as well. So this is just a huge turn for Hampton. He's added a lot of power and toughness to his board, looking to chip away on Eric Froehlich and bring that 17 down to a 0. Jesse sitting at 41 life. Does not have to worry about his own life total in any capacity here. So this is a big draw step, and it's not going to do it. Eric Froehlich finds a Noble Hierarch, and Jesse Hampton is our first semifinalist here at Pro Tour Fate Reforged.
An amazing game there. I mean, Jesse really on the back foot early in the game, and then just hanging in there, seeing us transition into an attrition-based game and closing it out with Tasigur, one of the new cards from Fate Reforged.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning that you thought that this was going to be a grindy matchup, and we could certainly see why there. It was 1-for-1ing, even at the micro card level, as we saw the Flying Spirit tokens trading off 1-for-1 off of Lingering Souls.
A lot of interesting decisions there, and really interesting way the game played out.
Right, and I mean, any lingering thoughts there for you?
Lingering thoughts. Yeah, I mean, it was really exciting to see Tasigur be a key card in the game there. I thought that was basically what closed the game out for Jesse, but I thought both players had a lot of really interesting decisions, and the game played out in a pretty cool way.
Yeah, it did, and of course we did get a game 3 there. We don't always get those, and it was a pretty good one. There was a lot of gameplay there. Eric won game 1, kind of stomped him.
Yeah, we kind of saw things all across the spectrum there. We saw tempo-oriented, very fast games all the way through the super grindy Batterskull late game there with those decks. So it was a really good look at those 2 archetypes there.
Yeah.
Archetypes.
So we have our first semifinalist. It's Jesse Hampton. Why don't we send it back to the news desk and Richard Hagan to get us primed up for our next quarterfinal match?
Good.
All right, thanks very much, Marshall. Thanks very much to Ian Duke. Well, boys, Pro Tour Fate Reforged, Tasigur the Golden Fang wins quarterfinal 1. Goodness me. Luis, your take on that match?
It was grindy. I mean, the Batterskulls, they ran into each other over and over again. Lingering Souls slowly and inexorably traded for each other. That's a lot of how most of the games go. I mean, sometimes you do have a quick, Tarmogoyf Abrupt Decay Siege Rhino game like we saw in game 1, but most of the time, the cards end up just trading for each other so well.
Randy, I was very impressed with the way that Jesse, in that moment with Tasigur, you get all excited because you've got Tasigur, you can see the ways to do awesome things with that, but in particular, that he was able to go, I'm going to get rid of these cards out of my graveyard, I'm going to leave some lands there. That seemed very neat.
I was impressed with Jesse earlier in the game where I thought Eric had it. If you remember, there was a point where Jesse had to crack a fetch land, pay 1, to get an untapped land, pay 2, to return Batterskull just to make a chump blocker, just to make a 4/4 germ that could block and buy him another turn. But the turn that he bought was, Lingering Souls. Here's Batterskull. Like, I really thought Eric was just, his opening draw was significantly better, and Jesse was right back up against it, but, found every little moment that he could to buy every draw phase that he could. And I mean, the Lingering Souls into the Batterskull obviously won him the game.
Well, let's take you to our bracket here at Pro Tour Fate Reforged. We'll show you what's coming your way over the next few hours. 1 quarterfinal is done. 3 are still to come. So there's Eric Froehlich, Jesse Hampton. That one is done, and Jesse Hampton advances to the semi-final. And next up, we are going to stay in the United States with Seth Manfield against Justin Cohen. So why don't we take a look at Seth Manfield, get a sense of his accomplishments in the game. This is his 11th Pro Tour for Seth, his first Pro Tour top 8, 50 Grand Prix he's been playing in. and he has 5 Grand Prix top 8s with 3 titles, Daytona Beach 2007, and a tremendous accomplishment for him to make his first Pro Tour top 8. Not a massive surprise though, because he does have a 60% win rate at the Pro Tour level. Randy, Seth Manfield playing Burn. Tell us a bit about his deck and what we're going to see from him.
Well, if you like to light things on fire, this is the deck for you. It's pretty straightforward. It is a linear, aggressive deck. You know, Lightning Bolt often heads to the face, Lava Spike, Helix, Boros Charm, Rift Bolt, Searing Blades. It's just a ton of burn. Now, when the deck is going well, what it really wants to do on the first turn is play a Goblin Guide. You know, and then ideally an Eidolon on the second turn. But you know, once you get past those first couple of turns, it's not really a creature deck. Hopefully you play creatures because they're efficient sources of damage. I mean, if you think about it, if every card does 3 or 4 damage, it only takes like 5 or 6 of them and your opponent's dead from 20.
Which of the cards, because it's very easy to think of this deck as a 3-3-3-3-3 deck, which is all sort of essentially true, which are the cards where you really need to know what you're doing with them? Which are the cards to watch out for in this deck?
I mean, Eidolon obviously is a little bit risky. Sometimes you've got to make sure you're playing Eidolon, but when you play a deck like this, you get to start out assuming Eidolon's going to be better for me than my opponent. If we just both take damage off of all of our spells, I'm okay with that. And you kind of accept these things at the point where you choose to play the deck. And then once you're actually playing the deck, it's really all about the mana. Like the decisions in the deck are how can I do things as mana efficiently as possible? Because you'll often have these 1 or 2 land draws, and you're just trying to figure out, if I suspend Rift Bolt, and boy, this Boros Charm costs 2 mana, that's so expensive, but then again, it does 4 damage, so it's a lot of the math of how do I add up to 20, or if my opponent cracked a fetch land, maybe paid for a land, how do I get to the 17 or the 15 that it takes to actually win the game?
All right, so we have an idea of what Seth Manfield is trying to do, and Luis, to what extent is this an interactive matchup?
This is not the most interactive matchup. In fact, this is one of the least interactive matchups, just because both players are trying to do their thing. And in Justin's case, that's play a Primeval Titan or a Hive Mind.
All right.
In Seth's case, it's burn you to the face.
Okay, so we'll come back to Justin Cohen in a moment, but waiting for us patiently is Brian David Marshall. He's got a very special guest with a bit more insight into the world of Seth Manfield.
Thanks, Rich. I'm sitting here with Logan Mize. Logan, we've seen Seth go on an incredible run this weekend. Indeed. The hometown hero, really, not too far from here. Team TCG player, did you guys get to hang out at the Casa de Manfield and
a few
play
of
test?
us. Yeah, a few of us. It went. The modern testing went well. We didn't get in as many drafts as I would have liked, though.
Okay.
Testing went well.
Seth is someone who always seems so calm and reserved, and we're talking about his top 8. You see, he was happy, obviously, but
yeah.
How excited was he, sort of in the privacy of his own group of friends?
He's calm, but not necessarily like. He was rather nervous. At 8-0, he was still just doing his laps around the room. At 12-0, still doing it. Had top 8 locked up.
12-0 locked up.
Still doing his laps. And then he went on. He lost 3 in a row, and then he was rather nervous he'd get paired down or some terrible catastrophe would happen. He'd lose and get 9th or something. But I had to reassure him that the math worked out, that he would have been fine. So he got the draw, did a few high fives, and he's in the top 8.
Okay, so now he's in the top 8. He's facing off against the Amulet Bloom deck.
Yeah.
Probably not. Was that a deck you guys tested against, leading up to the event?
No. Despite our team being rather large, about 12 or 13 people, no one had an interest in the Bloom deck. And so we just never tested it. It looks really bad on paper, despite it actually being quite good. And so we just never played against it.
All right, quickly before we send it back to the desk.
All right.
What kind of percentage would you give Seth in this matchup?
It's probably around the 40s. They both just try and go at each other as fast as possible. But the Bloom deck is actually quite good. And if he has a turn 1 Amulet, Seth will lose.
Okay. Logan Mize, thanks a lot. Sending it back to Rich at the desk.
Thanks very much to BDM and Logan Mize. Turn 1 Amulet. Now, Luis, it's still early in the morning here, so why don't you walk everyone through just what this Amulet deck is trying to do of Justin Cohen?
It's a little less complicated than the burn deck, but I'll try.
That is not true.
So the name of the deck is Amulet Bloom, and that's because Amulet of Vigor lets all its lands or permanents rather, come to play untapped, or its lands. So he plays. So Justin's trying to play Amulet, and every time he plays a bounce land, a Ravnica land that taps for 2 mana, comes into play, tap, and makes you return a land, it comes into play, triggers, and untaps. All right, so now these just immediately tap for mana. If he has Summer Bloom or Azusa Lost but Seeking, he can play multiple lands in the same turn. Play one of these lands, like a Simic Growth Chamber, for example. It comes in, untaps, tap it for 2 mana, return it with its own trigger. So the classic draw is turn 1 Amulet, turn 2 just land, Summer Bloom, bounce land, bounce land, bounce land, Primeval Titan. Or Hive Mind.
All right, so let's go with plan A. Let's go with the Primeval Titan. So we're on turn 2, and now we have a Primeval Titan in play. And we also, now that it has entered the battlefield, we have some triggers.
Yes, so it can get 2 more lands. A pretty common sequence is to get Teleria West, which is a land that you can pay blue, blue 1 and transmute it for a 0 casting cost card, and another bounce land. Bounce the Teleria West, transmute it immediately for Summoner's Pact, which lets you get another Primeval Titan.
Okay.
And then depending on how many amulets you have, because a second amulet produces a lot more mana because the lands trigger, or each amulet triggers for each land. So now the lands start producing 4 every turn. With enough resources, you can get Slayer's Stronghold, which will give the Primeval Titan haste, attack with Primeval Titan, gets more lands, triggers again, and then you can get Sunhome Fortress of the Legion to give it double strike. So you can potentially kill immediately, but you don't have to do that to win with Primeval Titan. Against Seth Manfield playing Burn, you can also get Radiant Fountain. If you get Radiant Fountain, you can gain 2 life.
Right.
So, and then you can also bounce it, and you're playing extra lands. So that's kind of like the Bloom Titan part of the deck. The Bloom Hive Mind is kind of the backup, and that's where if you get up to 6 mana, instead you play Hive Mind, and then you cast one of your pacts, like Summoner's Pact, for example. It copies it, your opponent, or rather, it gives your opponent a copy of it. Now Seth has to pay 2 GNG on his upkeep or lose the game, which generally he's not going to be able to do. There's also a couple pact negations and a Slaughter Pact floating around there.
Okay, why don't we take a look at Justin Cohen's player profile, show you his career statistics to date. And there isn't an awful lot there. That's 1 lifetime pro point, $550. That's going to rise a lot by the end of today. This, of course, his first Pro Tour top 8. And you see his record, 5-1 in limited, 7-2, and then the handshake draw at the end there. So you are going to see Amulet Vigor going at it against Seth Manfield Burn. Logan Mize thinks that Cohen is probably favored, but let's see how it all turns out. It is time to hand you down to the action just coming up. But who do you think wins? Luis, do you agree that it's an Amulet favorite?
I think the Amulet's favored because the deck's faster and has 3 Leyline of Sanctity on the sideboard.
Okay. Randy,
yeah,
who
I
wins?
do think the Amulet deck is faster, but Seth is on the play, and there's no deck that loses to itself more than Amulet. So, I mean, it's Magic. Anything can happen.
All right, anything can happen, as Randy says. Let's find out what does happen. It's time for the second quarterfinal here at Pro Tour Fate Reforged.